In fact, that's exactly the thought that the framework left, and it's a brilliant framework because then I can go back and put all my problems my company is facing into that framework, and then I'm able to decide which one of those are inherently I can use AI because the cost of the error is not so huge versus where should I be not automating it, and therefore how should I be working with AI, right? That is really what I saw as a framework, which brings me back to the core theme of this book, which I think is what is critical, which is you really talk about this. You talked about the analyst in the Damodaran-BOT, and in the pre-AI era, if I was an average doctor, if I was an average analyst, okay, I could still, go by because obviously information is not as composable as what AI did. But what you really talk about is you got to be absolutely an expert where you need to lead beyond what the AI can think. And is that becoming more and more critical in occupations over the next 50 years?
So, what you're getting at is one of the key themes of the book that I talk about, which is that AI will lead to a bifurcation of humanity, right? It'll lead to humans that are superhuman because they get so much better at what they do because of the AI. And then it'll lead to others who use the machine as a crutch, right? And they go the other way, right? And become potentially unemployable, because the machine becomes a crutch and they turn to it for everything and not able to get beyond it. Now, the lesson here is for humans is not that profound. It's what it has always been with every technological change, which is you need to up your game, right? And that's what I'm really getting at, right? So if you're the average, you're going to sink to the bottom unless you can up your game. The reason we've had, less than stellar diagnosticians or analysts continue is there wasn't adequate scorekeeping. It takes a long time to determine whether someone is good or someone is way below the average, right? And so, you can sort of fly under the radar. That'll become much harder to do. There won't be any place to hide now, when the machine enters the picture and is part of the process and part of thinking with you. Then you just, everyone needs to up their game. And that's what I'm calling the sort of bifurcation of humanity. And if you think about it, take a simple example. The other day I asked the machine, what's the difference between salt and sugar as a preservative? And it said, they both work by, osmosis and all of that. Now I needed to know what osmosis is to understand its response, right? And then it created a table of, and then it said, of course, it matters. The taste matters. Is salt more appropriate than sweet and whatever. And they created a table of salt versus sugar, and there were several factors, and they all looked pretty similar, except one that stood out, and it said salt works well at lower concentrations, whereas sugar doesn't. You have to have a high concentration of sugar. And I thought that's curious, and I said, well, why is that? And it said, well, because sodium chloride ionizes, whereas sugar molecules don't. And the ionization, those ions bind to water, and so there's less left over for something to grow on. And I thought, wow, that's so cool, right? But the reason I could understand that response is because I know something about ionization, right? And I know something about affinities and binding and stuff like that. If I didn't, I would not be able to understand its response, right? And that's a great example of what I mean, which is the more you know, the more AI amplifies you. And the less you know, the more it de-amplifies you, right? And that's what I mean by this impending bifurcation of humanity, right? That we've got this amazing resource, this amazing oracle on our fingertips. And the more we know, the more we can learn. I was talking to a friend of mine who's a molecular biologist, and he was talking about how it's enabled him to sort of go into neighboring areas, to learn about neighboring areas, because his problem involves knowing something about physics, knowing something about biology, knowing something about chemistry.
Yeah.
right? And his emphasis is drug safety, like, and he's able to bring in ideas from disciplines in a much more fluid way and learn so much more and amplify his own capability. Right? And that's
100%.
what we're looking at going forward is you've got this amazing machine that can amplify you depending on how you use it, or it can de-amplify you, right? So it's important to keep that mental muscle going and exercised even more, in thinking with machines as opposed to letting it atrophy. And that's
Brilliant.
the critical thing going forward for us to consider. And the answer is different for each of us, by the way, right? But what's common is that there is no getting away from this.